folks. Thanks for joining me. My name's Leon Pittard. I'm broadcasting from the land down under in Australia. I'm the host of FairIncomeRadio.com. Well, as we observe the changing face of media worldwide, the voice of the people is being heard. In fact, the voice of the people is becoming the media of today. As we watch the arms of the state stretching out to actually control, register, allocate every resource on earth, the most important resource on earth is we the people. And as we watch censorship begin to take place worldwide, we turn our attention to the UK, to our friends at the UK column. Most of you would have listened recently and seen that the UK column has come under assault by one of these arms of the octopus of the state more recently. Well, the UK column is a very important website which deals with many of the issues that we deal with here. Politics, health, the rise of the corporate system worldwide and how it is subverting government, and we look at they too are looking at the way that governments are changing, and the voice of the people is to a large extent being lost. So therefore the UK column is providing a very important voice of the people. They have many different contributors, but two of them who run a regular news segment, Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson, have joined me to discuss the latest assaults that have really come upon them by a group called ATVOD, but I'll get them to tell the story. Brian and Mike, welcome along. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Well, you gentlemen are doing a great job over there, and you run what I understand virtually a nightly news broadcast, which you run via a video feed and has been running live and then hosted on YouTube. So, gentlemen, run us through how things unfolded with ATVOD. How was that approach first made to you?
Right, so basically in February this year, we received a letter from ATVOD stating that they suspected we were running what they described as a video-on-demand service. There was no definition for what a video-on-demand service is, but they decided that we would have to fill in a form, and they would then make a determination about whether we were required to be regulated or not. Now, of course, we don't like filling in forms that we don't understand, so we asked ATVOD through various emails and several telephone conversations. We began a dialogue to discover exactly what it was that ATVOD were asking us to do. And ultimately, of course, they were asking us to fill in the form. They would then make a determination, and if they decided that we were required to be regulated, they would then send us a bill, and we would have to pay a fee, as is normal with these things, and then we would fall under their regulation regime. Now, the key point about this was that we had no real understanding of how they were going to make a determination against us. So I asked some specific questions of them with a view to finding some way that we could avoid this, because of course during the determination process we are entitled to make what they describe as representations to them as to why we should not be regulated by ATVOD. At each of the telephone conversations I was asking questions, looking for some avenue that we could find to achieve that, and at every point we were basically blocked. So it was becoming increasingly obvious that they were fairly determined to make sure that we were being regulated by them, and actually in the end we didn't make any written representations to them, because really all the potential avenues that we could think of were already shut down for us. So they have published, they made a determination against us, they published that on the internet, and of course within that determination they make a big deal about the fact that we did not make any written representations, but of course they did not publish the fact that we had actually made several verbal representations to them and had a negative response from them. So the determination was made, and we continued to sort of argue with them and try to find a way to avoid this. Ultimately, they issued an enforcement notice and gave us 10 working days to register with them and therefore be regulated by them. And you know, we had discussions about how we might proceed, but we actually we had made the decision from the beginning that there was no way that we could accept this regulation. We were going to have to take some form of a stand on it. And we decided at the end of the day that the best way to proceed was to make sure that as many people understood what was going on as possible, and probably the best way to do that was to simply stop being what ATVOD were describing as a video-on-demand service, and take down the videos that we had on YouTube already, in the hope of getting some form of public response to that, and therefore having the opportunity to explain what was going on.
So, if I understand correctly, their key point of contention is that they are wanting to classify you as a video-on-demand service, right? So that under this ATVOD jurisdiction, they say that any video-on-demand, basically they need to regulate. Now, you post all your stuff on YouTube. Is it because is it a live broadcast, or is it because people can go to YouTube and get it or access it off your website? I mean, video on demand, I've got videos on demand on my site. Does that mean everyone that posts videos that, people can go and view is subject to this body ATVOD? Why is it that they have come after you? Why do you think they've put the microscope on you? Has there been subjects that you've been dealing with that you think you might have, put the heat on people somehow connected with ATVOD?
Well, I'm going to get, Brian can answer part of that, but before we just go on to that last part, it's probably important to explain how ATVOD came about in the first place, because this came about as a result of a European Commission directive. And the intention of that European Commission directive was a recognition of the fact that corporate broadcast media like the BBC, like Channel 4, like ITV in the UK, that these companies were beginning to put programming that was otherwise only available through broadcast channels. They were starting to put that content on the internet. The directive, the original directive, was designed to make sure that broadcast television companies could not put content on the internet which was considered unacceptable for broadcast channels. And so that directive came to the UK, and the UK government, as usual with European directives, is the only government which has actually implemented it in the style that they tend to do. So they've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Other European countries are not so draconian about these directives that come out of the European Commission, and they tend to ignore things that they don't particularly like. The British government, on the other hand, absolutely runs these directives to the letter. So a statutory instrument was created, and of course this is a non-democratic process whereby an Act of Parliament can be amended through the signature of the Secretary of State without any debate in the House of Commons or in the House of Lords. And that's what happened in this case. An amendment was made to the Communications Act 2003 through a statutory instrument, and that law was then used as the basis for Ofcom, which is the Office for Communications, to establish ATVOD, which is the authority for television on demand. And the clue's in the name, because it's not the authority for video on demand, it's the authority for television on demand, and the intention was to regulate the television companies and the content they were putting on the internet, and the original intention was never to regulate YouTube content. But in our case, they ignored the fact that we have the ukcolumn.org website, that we're publishing articles, that we're publishing a newspaper, and they focused wholly on the YouTube channel. And this, we believe, is a first in this country, and we believe that they are absolutely working outside any authority that they're given through the law. And the other point is that because you were asking why they picked on us. What they are looking for is what they describe as television-like programming. So in a conversation that the chief executive of ATVOD had with somebody that we know, he admitted that their main sort of reason for existence is to deal with organizations perceived to be in competition with the mainstream. So there's certainly a competition aspect to this. But we have a view that there's also a censorship view, aspect to this as well. But even if it is purely a competition aspect, that is also a form of censorship, because it means that the small organizations can never build to a point where they could actually compete with any mainstream organization, no matter what size they are. So that's really a bit more background on that, but you may have more to add.
Well, I think what I'd add is that, of course, what can ATVOD regulate? Well, one of the things they do is that they big themselves up that they're helping to protect children by monitoring pornography on the internet. So they make a very big play. We ATVOD are out there to protect children. That's part of their role. Of course, at the moment, nobody has been successful in picking them up on the simple point: do we consider hardcore pornography television-like? Well, according to ATVOD, it is. We could have a debate over that issue. But the other thing is that they say they're there to regulate, for example, hate crime. So who decides what the hate is? Well, of course, it's ATVOD. How does ATVOD do it? By meetings behind closed doors with individuals who've got interests all over the internet and throughout the media world. So we would say, could it be that the fact that we even exist and we're actually challenging the British government in particular at the moment, which we regard as a criminal and paedophile organisation, does that constitute hate speech? Well, the only people who would decide that would be ATVOD people, who of course are not democratically appointed in any way. And the other thing, if I may, is to say we believe we've been targeted because of the material we've been carrying. We've been absolutely direct in exposing the criminal activities of the British government, whether it's to do with simple issues like fraud in their expenses in UK, or we're dealing with bigger issues such as the creation of wars overseas. But what the UK column has done over the last few years is, and we are the sole organisation that's done this, is expose the work of a government-backed political charity called Common Purpose. And it was Common Purpose that worked very deviously behind the scenes to create a huge press and media furore, which led to the so-called Leveson inquiry, an inquiry into the workings of the press and media in UK, run by Lord Leveson. And of course, it was the ex-chair of trustees of Common Purpose, Sir David Bell, who slipped out of his campaign role with Common Purpose and the Media Standards Trust to sit alongside Lord Leveson to judge Britain's mainstream media. Now, as a result of our work, eventually this was picked up by mainstream papers, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph in particular, and that has ultimately, without a doubt, slowed down the British government's attempt to take direct control of the press and media. So we've got reason to believe that we have made quite a few enemies in the establishment, certainly in the government, and certainly amongst those who are desperate to control the media, because of course our biggest defence against this emerging dictatorship in Britain is a free press and media. So I think we've been directly targeted as a result of that.
Absolutely. Look, you are a direct threat, and the thing is, you're a threat to corporate state media, and you're also a threat to government, because whenever you begin to put the microscope on the criminal activity of people in government and even the state itself with illegal, unlawful wars and genocide of humanity, pedophilia, whatever the subjects are that put the heat on the state and individuals in it, you become a threat to it. But what I'm interested in is the way that did ATVOD give Google or YouTube a directive to actually, pull your videos, or did you do that voluntarily? How did the mechanisms, the logistics of that work on your YouTube channel?
No, of course they don't go for the corporation. They go for the individuals, and this is where ATVOD is quite so insidious because nothing is defined. So, for example, we are told we are running a video-on-demand service, but of course we're not running a video-on-demand service. Google is running the video-on-demand service. YouTube is a video-on-demand service. So that should be the target if they are there to regulate video-on-demand services. We are simply a small organisation producing videos and putting them on. We are putting them on a video-on-demand service. That would be the rational, common sense definition of video-on-demand service, but they don't seem to have, their definitions just change as they choose. But to answer your question, we made the choice to take the videos down, and the reason we did it was because we were against a deadline for regulation. So they had given us a deadline whereby we had to fill in their form and ask very nicely if they would be so kind as to regulate us, and we were determined not to be regulated. So we had no choice but to take the videos down at this point and to cease being what they described as a video-on-demand service. What that allowed us to do was to A, publicise what had happened and the process that had gone through, and B, it now gives us time to make decisions about what the next steps are. And the next steps, of course, are dependent on the public reaction, but the public reaction has been frankly spectacular, to the point where ATVOD actually, for 3 days last week, switched their phone system off and just directed everything through to voicemail, because they were so inundated with telephone calls. They've had emails that they're starting to deal with emails again now, so they seem to have managed to get themselves back on their feet a bit. But there's basically they have gone within a week from being a little organisation doing a job that almost nobody knew about unless you had come into direct contact with them for one reason or another, to now having a reasonably wide public face, and they're now beginning to have to answer some of the questions that they couldn't answer when I asked them. So many people are now asking them, what is the definition of video on demand service? What is the definition of television like? And these are, and also even what are the definitions of hate speech and the regulatory requirements that you have? These are things that they've never actually been challenged on in an effective way before, and suddenly they're having hundreds, if not thousands, of people asking these questions, and for the first time they're having to come up with answers, and we haven't yet seen a response from them that would say that we made the wrong decision in what we're doing, because they basically don't have any rational answers for these questions.
You know, one thing that comes to mind about, and I believe you've done the right thing, congratulations, great work on, not actually engaging in this formal process, if you like, to apply for regulation, even though you had verbal contact, endeavouring to ask questions about what they required. This was obviously a trap, because it was like they said to you, look, you really need to be regulated. Tell us why you shouldn't be, right? And anything that you declared formally would have been used against you. Now, because you didn't reply formally, they've now said, well, because you haven't replied, this is a good reason to, see that you're a problem, right? But what does this on-demand mean? Is this got something to do with contributions, subscriptions? Is the money involved in what they determine is on-demand, or is it just being able to go on the internet and watch a video somewhere?
Yeah, they define on-demand as not linear. So broadcast television is linear, so you don't get a choice about when you watch it. There's a schedule, and if you miss the schedule, you basically miss the program, and you have to wait for it to be shown at some other time. And it's the choice of the broadcaster when that time is. On-demand, on the other hand, is if you're aware of BBC's iPlayer or any of these other sort of catch-up television services, this is on-demand video. You can watch a program at any time, at the time of your choosing, and it's those services like BBC iPlayer that were the intention of this legislation, not YouTube. And so YouTube is, in ATVOD's mind, defined as an on-demand service because somebody can go along to your YouTube channel and they can choose to watch a video at any time. that they choose to do so. But that is beyond the authority of the legislation that's in place, and we have been told this by several people with extremely credible knowledge of the whole regulation system within the UK.
And so you gentlemen have taken to doing your news broadcast outside, right? I've noticed you've been doing outdoor broadcasts and everything. Now, this broadcast that we are doing now, right, I'm going to post that on my video site on Vimeo. Now, are you able to post this on your YouTube account, or would that be you actually broadcasting a TV-like interview with this guy down in Australia?
This is one of the sort of vague areas that we're not certain about yet, so we've got to sort of test this out, sort of push the boundaries a little and find out. I suspect because you made the program, we probably wouldn't have a problem. We're still uncertain because this is really the key point that we're trying to make. We do not understand the terms that they're using because they're not defined. What is a television? What is a video on demand service? How can we cannot work out how we work within their rules if we don't have definitions for these things. And they have made it clear, haven't they, that they don't know what these things mean actually.
Well, we've got documentation. For example, the chief executive of ATVOD, Peter Johnson, and the chairman, Ruth Evans, were called into the House of Lords, one of the House of Lords committees to do with media and television broadcast, and it's on record there that Ruth Evans is saying, well, it's an evolving art. What we do is an evolving art. So there are a number of statements which they've made on the public record where they're saying, well, basically we work with companies in putting our rulings into place. So there's no factual definition, it's fluid, and they're making their own rules up on the spot. But one of the things that we've already started to expose, of course, is while they come to us with a very big stick, we're going to fine you £250,000 if you don't do as we say, with the main TV companies, they're actually having private meetings with them in order to agree how policy will be put into place. Exactly. And if we take the BBC, of course, one of the most rotten media organisations in the world, what they've done is had a series of cosy little discussions with the BBC. They've then made an effort to regulate part of the BBC's on-demand service provision. The BBC appealed, and surprise, surprise, in all three cases, the BBC's appeal was upheld. So there is an absolutely incestuous network of people. If I give you a little example, the chief executive of ATVOD was formerly working for the British Board of Film Censors. He was responsible for policy there, and we would say, isn't it interesting that we've seen pornography increase in the sorts of films passed by the British Board of Film Censors. So we would say Mr. Johnson was part of the original source of more pornography reaching the internet for young children to see. Some people might disagree with that, but that's our position. But he then becomes chief executive of ATVOD. We picked a director the other day. His name is Ian McBride. So he's working very closely with Peter Johnson. And then if you look at Ian McBride, he actually works with a company called the Media Compliance Group. And one of his two fellow directors, a gentleman called Patrick Swaffer, just happens to have been appointed in 2012 as the president of the British Board of Film Censors. And his former legal company, Goodman Derrick, previously provided legal services to the British Board of Film Censors. But if that's not bad enough, this same firm, Goodman Derrick, linked through to one of the directors from ATVOD, is working with the BBC, B-Sky B, Channel 4, ITV, and Argiva, and they're actually working with them to help sort of define what their on-demand services will be. So the thing is a disgusting mess of vested interest, conflict of interest. And the key bit that we said, well, we are not engaging with this organisation. They refuse to provide us with full and proper declarations of interest from their directors. We maintain, we'll be doing more on this in due course, that there was information withheld from some of the directors' interests. ATVOD simply said, well, we don't care. But basically, they're making their decisions behind closed doors, but they're in bed with the main television industry, who of course is getting extremely worried that hundreds of thousands, millions of ordinary people are saying, we don't want your crap. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that on Australian television or Australian radio, but the words come out, we don't want your rubbish, and we're going to produce our own news and proper content. Well, and I'll just smile a bit, because actually UK Column has a policy of not using any bad language, and we're not showing anything which is remotely pornographic. Presumably this is why they want to regulate us.
Well, great work. And, you know, the thing is, Hillary Clinton said a while ago that she said, we are losing the information war. And this is the issue, because the UK Column, people, media of the people that are talking about issues that are the most important issues, about the way that government works, about the way that these media bodies like ATVOD are in bed in incestuous relationships with TV corporations themselves. And there's a complicated network of collusion and friendships and agreements and all of these things which really we the people are beginning to realise this is the way the world really works. And when we look at what we say government, it is supposed to be there for we the people. Yet when we see the arms of government endeavouring to squash the voice of the people that are addressing the real issues, well, we know we must be getting close to the fire. But let's talk a little bit about the regulating part of it. Like, we had the same thing here during the last Labor government in Australia, where they were saying that they wanted to come after every website that had more than 30 visitors a week. They wanted to have blog sites registered. Any site like mine, for instance, basically a radio site, would have to be licensed. And it's always been my opinion that this is what government will do, that they will come after the voice of the people and endeavour to license it and regulate it. In other words, that you will not be able to speak to a wider audience unless you are licensed with a body like ATVOD. Now, you know, we talk about, even though pornography sites and all of that, they're all licensed with them, but there's nothing, I mean, anything goes there, right? I mean, they can do whatever they want, it seems, corrupting the children, and people have access to this just bang at the click of a switch. But let's talk about the way that, how would our speech be regulated, and let's tie in hate crime, and the way that hate crime is being used for us to identify any real issues. Like, let's take a issue, for example, like a subject like Islam. And last week I was talking about and brought documentation from the UK and Europe where Chancellor Merkel, Sarkozy and Cameron, you would be aware of all of these statements, all said multiculturalism has failed. And I documented how many people are leaving their countries because their countries have changed, for instance. Now, let's just talk about factual evidence and how factual evidence can be referred to as a hate crime, if you like. Now, how this would come under this regulatory process. Talk a little bit about that and maybe what you're seeing take place in Britain for people that do not hate people at all, but just want to speak about the reality of what they see their country changing into.
Well, I'll pick up straight away on this, and the issue I'm going to come back to is paedophilia. We have seen a phenomenal campaign in UK, strongly led by the BBC. Of course, the BBC with the huge and vile skeleton of Jimmy Savile in the closet. But the BBC has absolutely been forefront of a campaign which has attempted to pin the label paedophile against Muslims in Britain. So we've seen a number of police operations around the country which have picked up Muslim men, Asian men, and there has been a huge amount on the BBC and in the press saying, well, of course, the problem with paedophiles in Britain is all as a result of the Asian gangs, when in fact all of the evidence shows that the actual running of the high-level paedophile rings is being conducted through the British government itself. But the moment you attempt to get near the subject, of course, the sort of race card is being played, almost in reverse, because we have stood up to actually say, well, hang on a minute, we've got Asian men, yes, who've done particularly vile things to young girls, but where there are cases of Asians, and we ourselves reported on one of these cases, Oxford and Cherwell Valley College in Oxfordshire, England, where young teenagers were being sexually, physically, psychologically abused, and the man who stepped forward to protect them was an Asian, so the victims were white, the perpetrators were white, Caucasian, and when an Asian gentleman, a Muslim, stepped forward to protect them, and he made over 80 reports to the police, he was hounded, vilified, and eventually lost his job for trying to protect those youngsters. The BBC would not investigate the story, would not report on the story. So we are seeing a whole range of things at the moment. If you talk about the numbers of people coming into the country, which is simply factual. It doesn't matter where they're coming from, because of course they're now coming in from all over the world, whether it's Eastern Europe or still from Asia, or indeed China. We've got infrastructure which is literally crumbling. Our hospitals can't cope, our schools can't cope, our roads can't cope. It is not the fault of the people coming in, but if you dare to actually talk, as you say, about the statistical numbers, you're getting very close to what the government brands as hate crime. So it's very obvious to see that governments want to control absolutely anybody that dares to stand up and put an alternative view across.
And I think what you are doing at the UK column, along with many other developing media of the people, is that we are speaking contrary to the narrative. And as we study the way that state corporate media works, there is a narrative that must protect certain industries, certain groups, and they are protected against really any sort of scrutiny or against any sort of focus. And yet what the people's media is doing, like you gentlemen and your contributors at the UK column, is really putting a focus outside the narrative. And this is a threat to the system, to the not only the state but also corporate power, whether we be talking about the medical cartel and drug manufacturers and the adverse effects of different medications, or whatever the subject may be. It is really stepping outside the narrative that is a threat to very powerful economic, political and sometimes religious entities.
Well, I totally agree with that, and I will say, if the information is put across in a measured and factual way, and if evidence is put in front of viewers or listeners, irrefutable evidence, then that's a very powerful message. And we're also seeing, of course, that many, and this is good news, we think this is really good news, it's obvious that many young people are simply tired of everything that's been thrown at them through their lives. They're looking for alternative sources of information. They know something's wrong, so they're coming to alternative media to discover what's happening. And as I say, if the information they find is factual, it's put over in a calm, reasonable way, they're beginning to pick it up. We even had one situation, I'm just going to say one of the things that Mike's been doing constantly is exposing the sheer lies being put across to do with financial matters. and perhaps he might like to say a few words on that. But a little while ago, we had one of the very devious organisations in UK, Demos. Demos, of course, has a Marxist background, but Demos was coming up with a scheme where they were going to put teams into schools in order to teach children how to be careful for false information being put out by people presumably like the UK column across the internet. So we have a dangerous Marxist think tank closely aligned with mainstream government, particularly the Labour Party, completely aligned with the political charity Common Purpose, and they were taking grant money in order to go into schools, in order to poison children's minds, to stop them watching a wide range of information for working out what the truth was themselves. But you've particularly gone for matters to do with the lies over the finances, wouldn't you, Mike?
Yes, but it's an easy subject because there's so many of them. There's no problem finding corruption and lies in the financial system, and but it's a continuous stream of lies, and that's. Don't really know what to add to that other than to say that is an issue we really need to deal with front and centre, because it's being used to control our lives on a daily basis.
Well, and I think what you're doing is great work, and I do similar, where I scrutinise the state corporate media and often bring to my listeners the absolute inconsistencies and lies that are being perpetuated to keep the system within power. But gentlemen, we've got about 5 minutes left, and you're about to go to your own news show. But give us a couple of minutes wrap on what's on your mind today, what you're going to share on the news tonight. Give our listeners a taste of what they can get when they tune into the UK column news hour.
One issue which is absolutely got to be mentioned is again paedophilia at the highest levels of government, because there is a building scandal in this country. We have known about it, and we've been campaigning about it for many years with other people, of course, and certain names have been consistently coming to the fore on a private basis, because we can't obviously make allegations against anybody without any evidence, without any documentary evidence. We may have witness statements or so on, but it may not be quite good enough to go public with it. But there are certain names starting to rise to the surface at the moment, which have been names that have been hidden, or at least been under the surface for quite a long time, and certainly there have been allegations that certain top politicians in the UK have known about or been aware about top high-level paedophile rings within the British establishment and within the Houses of Parliament themselves. And so one of the people who may have something to add is going to be making a statement today, and that's Leon Britton. And we wait to see what that statement is going to be. He's due to make a statement at lunchtime today about what he knows about what was going on in the last 20 years or so with regard to high-level paedophile rings. So that's certainly one issue we'll be dealing with today.
Well, I just reinforce that, because of course this is an ongoing issue. We've still got the Jimmy Savile affair. In fact, it's gaining strength as more and more victims come out. This man, let's deal with this subject. This man was allowed into hospitals and secure units where he carried out abuse. He was even visiting hospital morgues. And this is a man connected with the royal family, connected with prime ministers, connected with members of parliament. And yet nobody knew about it. Secret services didn't know about it. The royal protection teams didn't know about it. This, of course, is an utter lie. What we know has been going on is that the paedophile rings that the public are told are dirty old men in raincoats, absolutely untrue. These rings are being run from the very highest positions of power. And once you get to understand this, of course, the ability of politicians to make an unlawful decision, unleashing a war where millions hundreds of thousands, millions of people have died. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, we can name it. Ukraine is the latest. I'm afraid to say it's evident to us Britain is being run by criminals and paedophiles, and we've got to deal with this issue. Today, that will be a key part of our news for our lunchtime news.
And it's a big story, I mean, and it's a big issue, and it's a lot bigger than what I think any of us actually know. As you would be aware, of course, not only Jimmy Savile, but now Rolf Harris, and these people are all very much embedded within the ABC, BBC community. The state media have been protectors of these people for years, and these are big issues. But gentlemen, look, in closing, direct our listeners to your website and your work, and if there's anything they can do, tell us what they can do.
Well, the website is ukcolumn.org, and we also have a YouTube channel which at the moment only has 3 videos on it, but up until last Wednesday had 200 or 300 videos on it and about 2 million video views. So hopefully we'll get that content back up in some form in the not too distant future once we get some clarity about where we stand. But in the meantime, ukcolumn.org is the place to go, and that's where we will keep people updated on the latest with ATVOD. On the ukcolumn.org there is generally some content being made available via a live stream, and that's just on the front page. You can see the little player on the right hand side, and people can watch that.
Well, what to do about it? Well, the big thing is exposure, in my opinion, getting the truth out there in every area to do with society, to do with what's happening in a spiritual sense, talking about the children, of course. If you get the truth out there, that's 90% of the battle. We've got a lot of people to wake up. We always say, it's not enough to watch programs like this or to be listening from the comfort of your armchair. We require each and every person to be doing something. Write a letter, complain, withdraw your consent, tell a friend, talk in the supermarket queue, talk when you're having a beer in the pub, but get the message out, because when people understand that they're being run by vicious and very dangerous, in some cases, criminals, we can start to deal with the issue. While they're asleep, we can't. So it's getting the truth out there, but also linking up with other like-minded people. So we'd love to do another link up with you if you'll have us.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and listeners, anyone listening to this broadcast or watching this video, I encourage you to post it on all your YouTube sites, get it around, tell people what is going on, and utilise this awareness. This is a state of emergency where government is wanting to regulate our speech about us, we the people, the voice of the people. But Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson, it's been great having you. Thanks for talking to us in Australia. We'll talk again, I'm sure. Thank you for joining us.
Brilliant. Thank you. Bye-bye.